Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast, where we answer your sales distress calls. I'm your host, Liz Hyman, bringing the rescue boat to your sales challenges. In this ever-changing sales environment, it's easy for leaders to feel adrift. We're here to be the beacon guiding you to success. Each episode, I'm joined by top sales experts and practitioners who have navigated this waters and come out victorious. Together, we'll uncover the insights and strategies that will help you hit your sales targets and grow your business. So if you're ready to turn your sales distress into sales success, you're in the right place. Let's dive into today's topic. Hi, I'm Liz Hyman, and this is the Sales SOS podcast. And I'm here with the crew that's going to save you from your sales nightmares. And we've been talking about CRM for the last 2 episodes. Today, we're going to talk about the biggest mistakes we see when people set up CRMs. And we don't have a whole lot of time, so we're going to cram a lot into this really fast. When you make mistakes setting up your CRM, the results that you get, your ability to predict, your ability to make decisions, they're all at risk. So let's start in with, I don't know, Mike, why don't you start? What is like the biggest mistake you see people making when they're setting up their CRMs?
Designing the CRM for leadership and reporting rather than what the people who are actually selling stuff or engaging with customers actually do. You get a RevOps group to come in and design a bunch of things because they went to a talk and heard about all the cool things that they could report on and all the integrations that they could do. And they build it all up, and you build this monster of stuff that is not functional and is just bloated with crap. So that's my number one, and it drives me absolutely nuts.
So as a leadership team, it is important to think about what you need to know. Like, what do you need to know? Not everything you can possibly know, right? So reporting is important. Usability is more important, because if they're not filling it out, you got no data.
When they actually do their job and it enables them to do their job and the information comes naturally, it's amazing what kind of information you can gather, because we're humans. We have all these biases. So we believe things are a little bit different, like closed loss reason or closed won reason. The most common closed won reason that I see out there right now is relationship. What kind of relationship? Like, what am I going to do with it? Relationship, the person you're selling to happens to be their spouse happens to be your brother-in-law. Like, what does that mean? So yeah, designing
probably the most common closed loss reason is going to be price, right? And it's like, I always view that as the lazy answer. Like, price is a component, not going to say it's not, but it's usually not the primary reason why you lost.
What else are we doing wrong? What other mistakes, Brim? What other mistakes are we making?
So I think there's 2. From the implementation, it's over customization. A lot of these tools can be used much more simply than we make them, but we think, we want to add this, and all of those add steps that salespeople will not take or will just struggle to get through. So I think, believe it or not, an out of the box, especially if it's the first time you're implementing a CRM, may be the best way to go. Just follow the grid, right? Over time, you can see where your gaps are. And then when you improve the product, it's based on a real experience, a real need, versus I'm going to customize it in the beginning. The other one, and this is probably not at the right time, but it's still, I think, probably the biggest mistake, is insufficient training to the users on how to leverage it. That, they go through a training program and maybe they have a white paper that they can go back to look at, but there's just not good enough training so that they're prodding and poking and trying to find things and frustrated. And then that immediately will reduce your adoption rate.
Absolutely. And if you are going to customize, think about what you're taking out more than what you're adding in.
I love that. So yeah, that's
I think the biggest mistake that I end up seeing is really too many required fields, too many steps in the process, and you're not taking into account who you're asking for that information. You're saying, we have all these required fields to move on to the next step. And it's like, then you get somebody who actually sales and they look at it and say, we're only going to have that piece of information maybe 40% of the time when we get to that part. So you're asking this person, what you're really going to get is either bad data, most likely, right? Because they want to progress it. And then now you're going to be complaining that the data from sales doesn't match or doesn't fit what we ultimately end up on. Well, it's because you're asking for that data in an inappropriate spot. And are you actually looking at feedback from the people that use the system as to what works and what doesn't, what's missing that they need that would make it helpful for them, right? It doesn't mean you're always going to be able to give them everything they want, but you should at least understand what their needs are. So you do the same thing if it was a customer.
Right? Here's my one thing I say about salespeople all the time, and I'm a huge salesperson advocate. If you force them to give you an answer and they don't have it,
they'll make it up.
They'll make it up.
Yeah.
Salespeople love to make stuff up. They don't know the answer. They make something up and keep going. So
they
don't
can tap dance.
What?
They can tap dance in any meeting, right? Like, hey, you ask me a question I'm not prepared for, I'm going to give you something, right?
We hire creative people. They'll be creative.
Yep.
John or Renee, go ahead.
I will say that the number one thing I see, and again, I sit in a little bit different position. I work with sales very closely, so I understand a lot of the things that you're seeing, but I'll just kind of give a more global answer, which is if you go into it building for one piece or without the full 360 perspective, that's where you end up with the biggest messes that I've seen out in the wild, right? So if you don't go in thinking what is the journey and what is the workflow for the team supporting the journey in tandem, and what is that all the way across, then you end up with a Frankenstein of things, and you frustrate the customers and the employees the whole way through, right? And the second part of that is there's almost always a sacred cow somewhere in the whole system that is kind of mucking that whole thing up. Like there's some person or department that has a stranglehold on it, and you're backwards engineering around that when you aren't supporting the journey and the workflow. So getting all the people at the table and on the same page before you build it out, to me, is the biggest piece.
I think to add to that point, this is John here. So I think a lot of people think that CRMs are a one and done type of system. It is never a one and done type of system. And because it is never done, just like when you buy Salesforce or anything like that, you need to have an internal product owner for that system, because that's the person who's going to drive the roadmap. So I'll give you a horror story. In a Fortune 100 company that I was consulting with, they changed the CRM globally once a year. So if you want new fields added, you want new things added to that dropdown once a year. I mean, imagine trying to be working in that company, right? And you're like, this thing doesn't work for me. You know, Chris, to your point, it's like too many. You get to change it once a year. I mean, that's crazy. But if that is how that CRM is managed internally from that product owner, well, then you have a really dysfunctional system, and it's not going to work for a lot of the people who are going to be using it, whether it be salespeople, marketing people, whatever. And so, to me, like from a technical side, there needs to be a product owner who owns that CRM, who listens to the internal stakeholders just like they would for customers, and they need to have sprints, for a lack of a better word, to update the system, to manage the system so that it's highly agile to what the business needs it to do, not once a year.
100%. 100%.
I think one of the things you have to look at, sorry, Mike, is your process as you've defined it in your CRM, how does that relate to how your customers actually buy, right? And they're going to be different, but is there something that's at least an overlay there that you can look at and say, hey, we understand how the process works on both sides, and we're taking that into account? Because if you're just doing it for you, there's going to be a whole lot of holes.
So I'm going to say this, and I'm going to start a huge battle, but the meeting, demo, proposal, close. Like assuming that just because you send a proposal, it's ready to close. right? So being really thoughtful about how the buyer buys so that you don't end up with this big bulb of stuff floating around at the bottom. That's really important. I want to go back to what Renee said for a second, because and she was being really vague and kind, but I'm going to say the biggest nightmares I've seen is when accounting is the one that's dominating the process.
Mm-hmm.
The way accounting works and the way sales work couldn't be more diabolically opposed. Like, it isn't possible to come up with something that's more different than those two functions, even though we're both talking about money. So the kinds of things that happen is I have this accounting system that may or may not be antiquated, probably is antiquated if it's doing dumb things. And it's forcing the CRM to create a new contact at each location in order to send an invoice. So, okay, great. So we'll just make 6 of that contact, because there's a corporate, when all the invoices go to corporate, but there's 7 locations. So we'll just make, however many of those person. And then sales is trying to figure out, what do I do here? Or an accounting team that says, you can't put it in the CRM until we've qualified it as a buyer who, has gone through the credit process and can buy from us, because it can't get into our accounting system until that's true. So you can't put it in the CRM, because then it'll go into our accounting system. Or how about we need a specific shipping address that works for accounting. And what accounting does is it creates a code. So we're going to create a contact that is a code that's a shipping address, right? These are the kinds of activities that happen when you're not thinking about, I don't need I don't need a bunch of fake. I need real information in the CRM. I don't need to mistakenly type it in the wrong version of that character, right? So really thinking about, what does accounting need, but how does that impact the data that we're getting? And it goes back to this, someone said earlier, if I only put it in once I'm creating a proposal, right, then I don't have the whole top of the funnel to measure. And so we really want to think about, what do I want to measure, and how do these other functions come into this without dominating it?
Building on that point, Liz, it's going through all of the information that you have inside your system and understanding what the single point of truth is for each of those pieces. So as John talked about, single point of truth related to the customer and that kind of interaction, that flow. Yeah, good. There might be other things for other purposes inside the business, where there's data that resides in an ERP, or data that resides in a quoting tool, or data that resides in other places, where that ends up being the single point of truth of that specific object. And what's really cool with all of the integrations that are there is you can marry those things together and figure out ways to either get them connected natively or connect them through other kinds of sorcery that exist out there. One of the pieces that came up is this whole idea of, look, we've got to be really careful about where things are in the process. And I forget exactly how you said it, John, but where did you say about one of the mistakes that frustrates you inside the CRM? Can you restate it? And I'm having one of those senior allergy moments of brain completely going into brain fog. But there was something you said specifically about the process before Chris started talking. Anybody remember? I'm gonna have to go back to the videotape and then on it later.
Videotape. I say it all the time. There's no more tape.
Come on, there's always going to be tape.
There's no more tape. I do it all the time.
Was it about being managing the CRM? Iterative, yes.
It was the iterative process, right? So you talked about sprints. So if it's never going to be done, it isn't going to be perfect when you launch. So get it out into the marketplace quickly, get it out in front of your team, and then listen to feedback. And that's where that product owner that John was talking about is so important, because somebody's got to care and be an advocate for the people who are using the tool, collect the information. Because there are 6 of us on this call. We could all describe the same thing slightly differently. And if somebody you have a decoder ring to kind of pull those things together and synthesize the information, you're going to end up serving so many different purposes throughout the process. So leverage your engineering team internally to understand what agile methodologies are, methods are, iterative approaches to design, and how can you apply it in the building process as you go through and work for your team. It will never be perfect. So don't delay the launch because you just want to add one more thing into it.
Absolutely. I think, and for me, there's one more, Renee, I'll get back to you in just a second. There's one more thing that I think is really important, and it's a term I made up. I don't know if other people use it, but I call it data mush. And this is when we have fields that we have combined a whole bunch of different things into one field, so it actually measures nothing. So for instance, an example of that would be contact type. And so under contact type, we might have prospect, client, priority 1, list 350, right? So we have these different kinds of things that we're trying to measure inside the same thing, because either we think we don't understand why they're different, or we think, oh, well, we don't want to add more fields. So let's just add more options. Well, 2 things happen. 1, you get this data all mushed together. 2, now the salesperson has to go through 40 choices. How many will the salesperson actually go through before they just select one? Like 10 maybe. And then they're just like, I'll just pick one.
Is it on the first page, right? Like, maybe,
Right.
maybe I'll hit the down button once, but I'm not going beyond that.
Well, I guess
the cool thing is if I add an asterisk to the front end of my deal name, it all of a sudden is all the way at the top of my list. I'm just going to put asterisks on there.
Liz, can I just point out that kind of one of the threads that all of us have said essentially is probably one of the biggest mistakes, is that is not having someone who knows what they're doing running this. And that kind of falls into, like, when something gets an outsized vote, or there's a sacred cow, or the process doesn't match the workflow process doesn't match the buyer's journey. Like, people will invest so much money in all of these different things, and yet they hesitate to invest in the person who's going to be like running the heart and soul and the brain that's going to run your company, right? Like, your workflows are all going to get mapped to this and process, and different teams are going to touch it. It makes a huge difference in the experience that your customers and anyone else has with your company. But when you give it to someone that doesn't know what they're doing, so you and I, Liz, have both seen instances where someone in accounting is running the CRM and has no idea how the sales process, but they're the most data knowledgeable person in the company, so it lands there. And you can I've also seen marketing teams that have no idea. I mean, I've been fortunate in my life that I've worked inside of a sales department at one point and really inherently understand the sales process, but there are some marketing teams that don't, but because they're the ones that have the tech savviness. And then you have some where it's an IT department and that, or an engineering team, right? And that's where you get that mismatch that John talked about, which is, we're only going to update this when it fits our workflow, not when it fits the needs of the business, right? So investing in having some sort of ops team that really understands this is, I think, one of the biggest mistakes that I see, that people they'll go spend a ton of money on the software and then hand it over to somebody who isn't equipped to manage it.
Hang on, Bryn, 1 second, because I want to just dig into this a little deeper. So
It's on that too. So
having somebody who knows what they're doing, and what does that mean? It means they understand the flow of information. They understand the processes, the systems, and maybe understand the tech side too. Literally, Renee and I have worked with a client who spent a ton of money customizing a CRM to do things it shouldn't do because nobody really understood what it should be doing, right? So thinking clearly, making sure, if you don't know how it should work, hire somebody who can help you figure out how to set it up. It may seem like a lot of money. It's a lot less money than what I keep seeing, which is, our CRM doesn't work. We're going to get a new one. So let's take all these bad habits we had in the old one, bring it into the new one. And this CRM still doesn't work because we brought all our bad habits into it. So getting help when you need it. Bryn,
well, just really quickly, in the mindset of the E-Myth, right? So I don't know if you know the book, The E-Myth by Michael Gerber, but you've got to record your steps. So we had a challenge in our company where it was very hard to transition workload, and it wasn't CRM, but it's the same thing, from one person to another person, because it was all in their head, right? So getting that champion and getting that expert is fabulous. We've got to download their brain into a process that can be transferable. So when they win the lottery and leave for Hawaii, right, and we have to put someone else in that spot, that there are instructions on how to do all of these things that have been recorded for posterity, not prosperity. Well, yeah, for that too, for both. But ultimately, I think that one of the biggest mistakes that businesses make is they have that champion, they rely on that champion, but it's all in their head.
Okay, Mike, last comment, and then I want to move to our next segment.
Number one, if you need someone to help with documenting processes, there's nobody other than John Way that I would go to. Like, he's awesome when it comes to getting some of that system stuff down. The thing I would add is when you hire that expert, let them do their job, which should include some kind of discovery. If you hire that expert and they start doing their job without any discovery, you hired the wrong expert.
And I would just add, to be clear, there's getting the expert to help you set it up, but then there's also somebody to maintain it.
Yeah. And let's talk about that now. So that is the perfect cue to bring us into our next segment. So thanks you guys for talking to us about mistakes that people make with their CRM.
And that's a wrap of this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. A huge thank you to our experts for throwing us a lifeline with their insights. We hope today's episode has equipped you to navigate the sales seas with confidence. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Sales SOS podcast on your favorite platform. If you have questions, comments, or topics you'd like us to explore, join us live on LinkedIn every second Friday, or share your questions on YouTube or LinkedIn. Until next time, keep sailing towards those sales goals. I'm Liz Hyman, your captain here at the Sales SOS podcast, saying smooth sailing and successful selling.